Welcome to Dialogue This Week. In this corner, we invite guests from in and out of Korea to talk about a wide variety of issues, ranging from culture and sports to the latest trends around the world. The last few days in South Korea have been quite chilly, with snow falling in many parts of the country. But despite the freezing temperatures over the winter, the sizzling heat seems to be even worse over the summer season. In fact, October of 2021 was globally the third warmest October on record, only marginally cooler than October of 2015 and 2019 rather, which are all within the last decade. November of last year was the fifth warmest November on record. All in all, the latest data released by the Copernicus Climate Change Service showed that the last 7 years have been the 7 hottest years on record. So why are we seeing such an increase in temperatures, and what can we do to stop climate change? For a more in-depth discussion on this, we have Vincent-Henri Puch, head of the European Union's Copernicus Atmosphere Monitoring Service, who's also the deputy director of the Copernicus Department at the European Center for Medium-Range Weather Forecasts via Skype. Good morning, Director Puch. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning.
So we've been consistently hearing about global warming for the last couple of decades, but for starters, can you remind us of why this is a serious problem and why we need to be conscious of global temperatures rising?
First of all, maybe it would be more accurate to speak about global climate change, because the situation is that we observe today and that we expect in the future can be substantially different between the different regions of the world. Now, of course, overall, if you make an average, what we observe is a warming of about 1.1 to 1.2 degrees compared to the middle of the 19th century, when we have the first meteorological measurements. So this may seem very little, 1.1 degree, but it is certainly not. What changes is not only the average, but also all the full distributions of temperature. So it means that the probability of having severe droughts or heat waves is considerably increased, as well as we observe the occurrence of extreme weather events. So it is really serious, and actually most countries in the world have agreed in Paris a few years ago to limit this change to between 1.5 and 2 degrees. That is for keeping our planet in a state that is not too different from the one that we've been experiencing in the last decades.
So when you say that global temperatures are rising, is this necessarily referring to air temperatures? How exactly is it measured and forecasted?
Yes, the climate reports generally focus on the surface air temperature, or the air temperature at 2 meters at the global scale. This temperature has been measured for 150 years or more from the ground, and increasingly from boats, from aircraft, and over the last 40 years from satellite. And what we do in Copernicus is to use exactly the same processing tools as weather forecasting. We use all these sources of information, ground, ships, aircraft, satellites, and we can provide a fully consistent global picture. We tend to call them maps with no gaps, so that we have the most accurate figure. And as a matter of fact, there may be 4 or 5 centers in the world with slightly different methods aiming at calculating this global temperature, and we get to very, very similar results. So it means that we can be really confident about the fact that the temperature has risen by 1.2 degree, which is consistent with what we know of the laws of physics, considering the increase of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere.
So it seems like a very precise way of measuring the temperature. But alongside air temperature, the Copernicus Atmosphere Monitoring Service, or CAMS, the agency where you're based in, also reported that atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations, which largely refer to carbon dioxide and methane concentrations, continue to rise as well. So it's a known fact that governments around the world have been setting and renewing greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets, but why are we seeing why aren't we seeing a decreasing trend yet? Are these goals just not enough? What's your opinion on this?
Yes, so we've been observing over the last 50 years, since there are measurements, an increase in greenhouse gases, CO2 and methane, and 2021 was no exception in that, with substantial increases. And in fact, it's not a surprise. I will take the analogy of a bath which is full of water. So the level of water is the concentration of the greenhouse gases, and the new emissions of the year is the tap of water, the fresh water. So even if you reduce the tap of water, if there is no drain, basically the water will keep increasing. And that's what we've been seeing. Even last year in 2020, where the lockdown measures relative to COVID were taken, we estimate that emissions of CO2 have been reduced by about 5.4% over the year at the global scale, which means that 95% of the emissions have still been emitted. So the water tap has still been bringing water into the bath, and so the water level has increased. The crucial aspect of the problem is that greenhouse gases in the atmosphere stay for a very long time. One molecule of CO2 will stay for 100 years. And because of that very long time in the atmosphere, the effect of changes in emissions is only effective if it is substantial and over a large number of years. So we could not see signs of changes, which is not because the countries are not making efforts, but it's simply that these efforts are maybe not strong enough and have not been in place for long enough for affecting really the levels of greenhouse gases.
So let's just hope for more could be done on the issue. But Director, just last year alone, the U.S. was hit by a historic drought that came with record-breaking heat waves, which led to wildfires that burned nearly 7.7 million acres of land. And it seems like these wildfires are getting harder to fight. So this is all the more concerning because it was reported that carbon emissions from wildfires worldwide amounted to 1,850 megatons last year only. So how bad is the impact of these wildfires? Are there other countries that are fighting as many wildfires as the United States too?
Yes, unfortunately, we've been observing in recent years and in 2021 alone a number of unprecedented wildfire. The one I will mention is in northeastern Siberia, the Sakha Republic region, which has seen raging fires in the summer months. There was also lots of fires around the Mediterranean area in August. And if we go a little bit further in the past, we remember massive fires last year in Australia, or if we go even further back in 2015, 2016 in Indonesia. So wildfires can be really devastating. The ones in California have been particularly extreme this year and last year, but it's a worldwide concern.
Well, it seems like the vicious cycle of rising temperatures causing more wildfires and bigger and more frequent wildfires worsening global warming continues. But from where you see things, is there a possible solution to this?
First of all, maybe I will surprise you by saying that the total amount of carbon emissions from wildfires has decreased, in fact, in the world in the last 20 years, for which we have data. This is because fires, which are increasing in other parts of the world, are decreasing actually in the tropical areas, which are the largest sources of emissions. But even if the global figure is decreasing, it does not mean that there is no problem. Fires are dramatic in several regions. And climate change also is only part of the story. Climate change will provide conditions that are more conducive for fires, because whether it's hotter, the soil is drier. But in order to have fire, you need also ignition. And ignition is often caused by humans. Preventing ignition is also very important in the case of fire. For instance, the Dixie Fire, this very large fire that took place in California, started just next to a road. And unfortunately, this is probably not a coincidence. So there is a solution about fire, which is to be ever more vigilant about ignition of fires by voluntary or involuntary human action.
Now, Director, another climate issue I want to touch upon is the Antarctic ozone hole. The Antarctic ozone hole of 2021 closed just before Christmas, setting yet another record of being one of the largest and longest-lived holes. So CAMS tracks the development and recovery of these holes every year. Can you help us understand where these ozone holes fit into our fight against climate change, and what causes them, and what does it mean that the ozone hole increases in size and longevity?
Yes, the ozone hole events is connected to climate change and is not connected to climate change. Let me explain. So in the 40s and the 50s, we started producing compounds called the chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs. And these products have made their way into the high atmosphere, so what we call the stratosphere, that's between 10 and 50 kilometers of altitude. And in the 80s, it has become apparent that there was this phenomenon of ozone hole, where a large quantity of ozone was destroyed at the very beginning of the spring. So in Antarctica, this is in September. And the root cause of this destruction of ozone, seasonal destruction of ozone, was traced back to these CFCs. As a result, as soon as this was discovered, the countries of the world agreed in 1987, the so-called Montreal Protocol, to ban these emissions of CFCs. So that was, I think, a first decision from all the countries in the world to ban certain manufactured products because of their impact on the environment. The issue is that it takes extremely long for the atmosphere to get rid of these chemicals, and we don't expect the return to normal before the 2060s only.
Wow, 2060s. Well, now, Director, it's become evident that COVID-19 pandemic has had some impact on air quality, climate, and consequently the weather. So can you tell us what some of the impact has been?
Yes, so the impact that have been most visible are most probably on air quality. The reason is that air quality involves pollutants which are fairly short-lived, as opposed to the greenhouse gases that I was mentioning, which means that as soon as you change emissions, you will see changes in the atmosphere. So, for instance, one of the key pollutants, nitrogen dioxide, NO2, for which about half of the emissions comes from car traffic, was cut down very substantially. We talk of figures about 30 to 50% during the lockdown periods, mostly in 2020. And during this period, we could see that air quality improved, and we did a study over Europe where we could quantify that in the period March to July 2020, 800 lives were saved because air quality levels had been improved in the meantime. So air quality reacts immediately. In terms of climate and weather, the impacts were way less noticeable. I mentioned that CO2 emissions were reduced by about 5.4% in 2020 compared to 2019. So fairly limited impact on climate, and on weather, actually. The biggest impact that we've been looking into was the fact that we lost lots of observations from commercial aircraft due to the shutdown of most aircraft lines. Commercial aircraft do provide lots of meteorological observations, and we were fearing that the quality of the weather forecast would be deteriorating because of that. In the end, we managed to use additional satellite observations, and the weather forecasts were not that changed. So in the end, not that many impact on climate and weather, neither on the quality of the forecast.
Now, Director, before we let you go, the Copernicus service is mostly used at government levels as well as commercial corporate levels. I must ask, is it also a resource for private individuals? And in another note, like, what can private individuals do to also, contribute to stopping climate change as well?
Copernicus tagline is the eyes on the earth, and it has been a decision from the European Union to make all the data free and open, following examples from other parts of the world. It comes from the fact that there is a realization that the value of the investment is much bigger if you make all this data free and you share them with public institutions, with private companies, and down to any citizens. So Copernicus data today, as a result, is flowing to many citizens. When you look at air quality bulletins over big international broadcast channels on your smartphones, very often you will have a first layer which comes from Copernicus, mostly because it's operational, which means that every day, 24/7, there is information. It's combining information from ground sensors and from satellites. And basically, it makes environmental topics, air quality, greenhouse gases, as ubiquitous as weather information that today everybody is used to have in her or his pocket. And knowing about the state of the environment, knowing about the state of air quality, looking that our own actions can make a difference, I think is a very important step, so that everyone can take measures at individual scales, but also give some more support to the government to actively combat climate change and curb CO2 emissions.
All right, I will keep that in mind. Director Pook, I'm afraid we'll have to wrap up. Thank you so much for your insights. Have a great weekend.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.